problem I'm running into is getting this thing to line up, and this bracket, hopefully it's not that big a deal, because this bracket, I welded it onto the brand new firewall exactly where it was on the old firewall. So I'm gonna have to do some quick research and figure out how to get all this to line up, because it's kind of confusing, and I might wind up having to cut some of this off. I've seen that people that put these mounts on have to cut some of this inner fender off, so we'll see. Okay, so I cut out these notches on the inner fenders, and they are going around the mounts on the engine. That the one I just showed you goes on the passenger side, and on here I cut off that lip there, and I might have to cut more off, but I wanted to just cut the downward facing, the vertical lip, just to see how close, if that gets us any closer, but I have a feeling I have to cut a little bit more back. Alright, so I got it bolted on now. This is looking good. Other than these holes not lining up at all, this shouldn't be a problem. I should be able to just drill that out, should be fine, because those are slotted holes anyway, so I'll just be making them more of a slot. The cutout here worked good, but it is rubbing up against the that bolt there, so I'm gonna just make a little notch, nice clean cutout, and try to make it look as good as I can. So it's actually starting to work out better now. Okay, got the new cuts on here and got it bolted up pretty good, and when I pull it out, about to how it would actually be sitting, the bolt clears, you could get to the nut, all that clears, it looks good. I may have to come back and do some more cutting, we'll see. On the passenger side, I think I'm definitely gonna have to make that cut. You can see my Sharpie line there. I may have to make that cut, because I got a little bit more tight on this side, but when I'm pulling around, I'm not getting much. It's still rubbing on that mount, so I may have to do some cutting on this, but I'm gonna go run to the store and get new bolts, nice new shiny bolts for this thing. I'm gonna get some bolts that fit this radiator mount for putting on the cowl and all that jazz, and make sure they fit all these threads. So yeah, I'm gonna go get a whole bunch of bolts, nuts and bolts, and then when I come back, we're gonna be cutting floors out on that car. Alright, just got back from the store with all the new bolts and everything. I got all nice new bolts for these here to the firewall, and it is looking nice. These, like I said, still got to be drilled and moved. The slot, made the slot bigger. Up here, I've got it pieced together, just a few bolts. So like these are sticking out. They're flapping around. It's a little bit loose up front, but it's all tied in. I got one bolt there and one bolt there. The slots that I cut it's covering the bolt right now, but if I line up the bolt holes to that, it pulls it back and clears, so that's good. And this side clears, but it's rubbing on the mount, so I'm gonna cut this line here. I might even come in just a hair further and cut, so that'll be a later date, but for right now this is my stopping point, so I can work on some other stuff. But yes, pretty neat having this whole front clip together. I've never had this all together ever since I've had the truck, so it's actually really neat to see the truck coming together. Getting excited. Alright, so I'm working on the wiring for the 302. I've got a simple painless wiring harness for the DuraSpark system, and right now I'm just kind of figuring out where I want to hook things up, where I want to mount the computer, the ignition module, and run my wiring and stuff. And the kit doesn't perfectly fit something, so I'm having to do some modification. I'll show you what I'm working on, where I'm at so far. So I'm gonna get that figured out, and may even fire over the motor. Not sure yet. We'll see how far we get, but I do want to get all this hooked up. You know, mount my ignition module to the firewall, and figure out the inner fenders wherever everything's gonna go. I still gotta figure all that out, so that's what we're working on right now. And let me show you what I've got so far. Okay, so here's my harness laying down here. I've got it attached to the coil. This kit came with like this little sleeve thing to like slip those wires over, and it just clips on and it holds them on with pressure. And I really wanted to use this, but I would have had to do several things to modify it to get it to work. So I wound up, I didn't have any of the extra clips on hand that already had circles through them, holes through them, and I didn't want to bother with having to take these off, so I just drilled holes through these two clips, and now it's bolted on. Once things actually all finalized and everything, I'm going to come back and put wire loom on here, and I'll run these wires downwards instead of upwards, but I want to be able to see everything and be able to figure out where all my stuff is. So yeah, I've got that. I'm thinking my ignition module would look pretty good sitting in that square on the firewall. I think that would look really sharp, plus where the wiring harness goes, that seems to work out. The other thing I've got to figure out is my solenoid over there. I gotta put it somewhere, and I believe the last one was mounted on the block in the back somewhere over here, so we'll figure that out. If my wiring will reach, it might even go under the ignition module. We'll see. Okay, so things might change because I'm not a wiring expert or electronics expert, but based off the diagram, I think I got this figured out, and how my truck's laid out, what I want to do. So my coil has an internal resistor, so I don't have to wire this resistor in. So if I am correct, both of my wires are going to the ignition switch, and then, which I don't have an ignition switch right now, but then I got brown and white will go to my starter solenoid, and yellow is for a tachometer. So I was saying I would put my solenoid over there, but actually that's not going to make any sense because I got to run power from the battery into the starter, and obviously the starter's on this side, and on these trucks you can see through there the battery goes under that hole in the floorboard in the cab. So I'll actually have power cables running up to here and then down to the starter. So that'll actually keep it clean to keep the solenoid over here under this thingamajig. like I was originally planning. So I think that's what I'm gonna do. I think that'll keep everything clean and tight. I'm not gonna cut any wires right now because things might change, but I do think I'm gonna go ahead and work on mounting this thing where I want it, and the starter solenoid where I want it. But yeah, so I'm gonna start with getting this thing mounted to the firewall and this thing mounted to the firewall. So here we go. All right. Okay, so I got this mounted. Looks pretty good. Happy with that. So next is the starter solenoid, which I think will just go right below it. Alright, got some temporary bolts on here for now. So it's definitely sitting down lower. It's like that nook was made for it, to be honest. And hopefully that works out because I really like where it's at. Alright, got myself a momentary switch, so I think this will work good for a simple starter. Okay, so I can't find my 15/16 socket to fit the crank on the 302, so I can't turn it by hand to try and check for top center. So I'm gonna hook up the starter and see if I can find a battery instead and try and click it till it gets to top dead center on the first cylinder. So maybe that'll go all right. Found some junk wires. They've got battery hookup on them, and then one of them is just this flat connector, so I can go from the starter solenoid to the starter. So I can get a battery hooked up to everything. I gotta find a spot to ground on my frame. So yeah, so we'll find a battery. I think I know where one is at, and we'll wire up the starter, switch, and should be good to go. Okay, so I got all the wiring done for the most part, and got my switch hooked up, got all that hooked up, and got my starter hooked up. Just gotta hook it to the battery when I get ready. But before I do that, I found my 15/16 socket, so I'm gonna try and do it by hand first. Okay, so I've been defeated. I can't get any power to the starter. I'm not sure if I'm missing a ground somewhere other than the battery. I don't know. I cannot get it to get any power, and I'm not good at this electricity stuff. I think I got it to top dead center. I was holding my finger over the spark plug hole, and I did feel air coming out of it. And then I did move it to the 15-degree timing mark. So if I'm right, it's at top dead center now, and I don't have to worry about it. So we'll see how far I get with all the other stuff I got planned. Okay, now it's dark out and finally figured out the problem. Dad gave me some help, and so what we figured out was, for one, I was missing a wire, which was to actually give the solenoid power to switch over. So we wired in another switch for power, And then even then we were losing power when we would turn it on, so that wound up being a ground issue. So we moved the ground from off the frame and onto the block, and it turned right over. I don't have it hooked up to fire, but also off camera I got this thing to top dead center by hand. Then I moved it to 15 degrees on the timing thing. Moved my distributor so that it was on cylinder number 1. Now it should be timed pretty close. This is all wired up and working, so hopefully we'll get it cranked and let it run for a hot minute. Okay, I just wanted to get a clip real quick to show that the wiring is working even though the motor's not hooked up to fire. So Caleb's here, he's gonna hold a light for us. Okay, so power on, and I should be able to bump this and turn the starter over. Voila, it's very loud. We're off to see the wizard. So we got his truck turning over, and we got gas going to it now. So now we're gonna get out this death trap looking thing and charge the battery.
It's okay down now, I think, just to look for it to run. Stay, hold on to it. Ready?
Ready. There's some flames. Your muffs aren't doing too good, aren't they? Can't see him on the camera. Well, it runs.